James chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. Our last two times together, we discussed the task of taming the tongue. And we really emphasized some of the applications during our second session together. Remember, we did a part 1 and a part 2. On the last time, I really wanted to do a little application and share some things that may be helpful in the process of learning to tame the tongue. But this week, we revisit the topic of wisdom. And if you remember, the first time we touched on wisdom was in week 1, where James discussed that in the midst of trials and tribulations, one, if they need wisdom, and I would even argue that there's a guarantee that you're going to need wisdom in the midst of your trials, one should ask for it, expecting God to give, because we know God will give those good things to those who asked him. But when we're talking about wisdom here, we're going to further define it and distinguish it from worldly wisdom. So it'll be a contrast between heavenly or worldly wisdom. Let's read first verse 13. It says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? By his conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom." First, I want to look at wisdom that's witnessed. He says, "Who is wise and understanding among you?" The Faith Life Study Bible says this. It says the Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament. It says it often employs this combination of words to describe a person who lives in accordance with the insight given by God. People demonstrate wisdom if their deeds reflect God's commands. And I want you to think about that. Asking, who among you is wise? You can say it this way. Who among you is living according to how God would want us to live? Are you conducting yourself in the best way possible among the community of believers? True wisdom, or we could say it this way, wisdom that comes from on high, is reflected in the lives of those who live according to God's ways. Keep that in mind as we go through this passage, because we're gonna look at extreme examples. We're gonna look at just examples in general, but we're gonna really dig into godly or heavenly wisdom versus worldly or earthly wisdom. There are some confirming passages of scripture that discuss this. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 13 through 15, it says, "Choose some well-respected men from each tribe who are known for their wisdom and understanding, and I will appoint them as your leaders. Then you will respond, 'Your plan is a good one.' So I took the wise and respected men you had selected from your tribes and appointed them to serve as judges and officials over you. Some were responsible for 1,000 people, some for 100, some for 50, and some for 10. And if you know your Old Testament, you will know that this passage is showing that got to a point to where things were just too much for Moses and he needed some help. And the wisdom here is, get some other people that have demonstrated that they're living wisely, or we could say that they live in such a way that they're responsible according to God's standard, not our standard. Appoint them people and there'll be leaders, there'll be officials among the people, and they'll have a certain level of people that's under them. Also in Deuteronomy, but here in chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, it says, look, I now teach you these decrees and regulations just as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may obey them in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. Obey them completely, and listen to this, verse 6, and you will display your wisdom and intelligence among the surrounding nations. When they hear all of these decrees, they will exclaim, how wise and prudent are the people of this great nation. There's something special about wisdom. It's not just the book of Proverbs that highlights wisdom and has wisdom calling out from its door. Throughout the Bible, there's a theme of having this practical wisdom. In a minute, you'll see why it's really talking about skills, life skills in life to be able to allow us to function properly according to God's ways and his standards. Let's look at the New Testament. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12, it says, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Now, it may not say wisdom there, but it's wise to live a certain way among people that don't know God in order for them to may even have a chance or may even want to consider the God that you're following or the God that has brought you into his household. Now, a good friend of mine has written on this, and he's talked about wisdom, and I want to look at how he parses this out even a little further for us. I'll put, for those that will watch this later on YouTube, I'm going to put a link to his video where he is examining the book of Proverbs, and he talks about wisdom on his second video, and I'll put the link in there. This is Daniel Napier. He says this. He said, wisdom refers to the life skills and dispositions at the level of habit that produces a fruitful order within this world. Now, as I began to explain his thought and his understanding when it comes to wisdom, he's going to correlate things from the origins of the world and how God, in his wisdom, created things. He gave it order first, and then there was a fruitfulness that came out of the order. And we'll see as we go through the text tonight that this is one of the reasons why wisdom is important, because it brings order in the chaos. He goes on to say this. It's that cluster of dispositions and skills that enable us to live in such a way that life becomes what? Orderly. And through that order, good things follow. And he gives some examples. He said, fruit, benefits for ourselves and others, they naturally follow this order of things that has been brought about, this structure out of the chaos that was in our lives or just in the world, just in general. You want to see a society or community flourish and good things like deeds and fruits in people's lives. You want to see what that looks like. If we can get the structure right, which is the wisdom, the practical life skills, if we can get those in place, we'll see some other things happen. He says this. Human wisdom is rooted in and modeled after the skill that God used in creating this world. In order to understand what we're aiming at in our lives, right, speaking about wisdom, we have to think a little bit about the way God went about shaping this world into a livable place for us. Think about that. God made this earth a livable place, but he used a certain structure in order of things so that the fruit of his work would begin to come forth. Y'all just think about this, because Daniel goes on to discuss these underlining principles and the structure behind everything we see in creation. I want you to think about this. He says, orderliness in creation is first, then fruitfulness in creation comes in stages. So God's wisdom is to get the order in place, and then the fruit begins to bud in stages. If you ever plant anything or you ever grow anything, you know that you start to see things come, but they come in stages. And that's the wisdom of God and how he works within his creation. If you heard me speak, you hear me talk a lot of times about developing deep roots. I even got it in some of my songs. Developing these deep roots, which will turn into these character traits that are active in our lives, and the fruit that begins to come from those things are very important. And it's the same with our lives. Roots before the fruits. Because when we get rooted in something, it's the foundation, and everything else is built off of that. This pattern reveals that a well-ordered environment that must happen first, then second, growth and flourishing can happen out of that order. He talked about that these were moral and practical skills that are in place in the life of the one that's operating in them. Think about them this way. Personal, habit-rooted perimeters, right? For thought and behavior, the way we think about things, the way we behave just in general. These roots they're habit-forming perimeters. They guard us from allowing other things to come in and mess with how we think and how we behave. They have to be established within ourselves before a life of effectiveness can follow. You want to be fruitful in your life, you want to be effective in everything that you do in every area of your life, then we must develop these roots first and allow God to get the order in place, and then we will get the fruit. Right? That's witness, that's wisdom that's witnessed. And now let's look at wisdom that's worldly. It's in verses 14 through 16. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice. Some translations say every evil thing. We have to be careful, because if we're honest with ourselves, we'll realize that outside of Jesus, our hearts are untamed. Things we hold on to, or you can say things we hold dear, are actually the things that are already in our hearts. They don't just show up when we're mad. They don't just show up at this time. Dallas Willard, he's awesome with some of the things he said. And I remember he said, he said somebody told him one time that I just got out of character. And he said, yeah, you're right. You got out of character. But he said, that's what you do. He said, you are the type of person that gets out of character. And he said, that's okay. And see, that's the thing we have to realize. Remember, I said that this fruitfulness, this budding takes place in stages. So it's okay if at one point in my life, I'm the person that gets out of character when I'm hungry, when I'm mad, when I'm frustrated. All of these different things, I get out of character at these times. But there's going to come a point as we stay connected to the vine, like Jesus tells us to do, that we will not be the person that gets out of character no matter what's thrown our way. And that's why it's awesome to follow Jesus, who's patient with us. See, we're impatient with one another. We get frustrated with people. People let us down, all these different things. We're good good at letting people down. We're good at trying to heap all kind of stuff on people when God is patient with us, and we just walk with him long enough, we'll check ourselves and be like, man, God, you was just patient with me, and I just blew up at so-and-so the other day. But what is our heart? And I'm gonna go back to Daniel again, because in his new book he describes what the heart is. But before that is the Lexham Theological Workbook says this, that our heart is the source of the physical life, but also the center of the inner life, including our perception, volition, and intellect. And Daniel talks about this a little bit in his book. See, the ancient Greeks looked at the heart as just the seat of the emotions, and that's how we talk about it even in academia today. Even in our colleges and our universities, we talk about the heart as being nothing but emotions. It is that, but it's more than that. Logos Bible Software says this: the locus of a person's thoughts, right, their mind, their volition, their emotions, and knowledge of right and wrong, right? You're talking about our consciousness, understood as the heart. So you do a lot with your heart in Scripture. You do a lot with it. And here's Daniel. Because he does something special with opening up what the heart looks like. He examines some things that I don't think we think about a lot. He says that our heart is our present awareness or attention, right? Anything we may be focusing on at any given moment. That's different. That's different than just, oh, I'm just emotional about things. And when they say emotions is the heart, it's not just that I'm emotional about things or it's anger and all of these other things. Yes, it's that. But at any moment, like even just think about when you're praying, right? Sometimes in the midst of your prayers, other things try to come in, right? And you have to find a way to get that out. So whatever it is that I'm presently focused on at any given moments, our hearts are untamed because they are undergirded with improper